Tax evasion in Nigeria is still at a high, with hundreds of companies and even government agencies themselves evading tax payments. Now, just last week, the Federal Inland Revenue Service revealed that over 100 organizations made up of private companies and government agencies owing the government over 169 billion in unpaid taxes right from 2004 rather. Now, despite this trend, the FIRS insists that it hasn't done too badly in terms of tax collection. It set a target in 2011 of about 3.62 trillion naira and was able by the end of the year to collect about 4.6 trillion naira. Now, this year it has set a 5 trillion naira target between now and the end of 2012, and it says that although it might sound like a very ambitious figure, with the level of commitment of the agency's staff, that amount is actually achievable. We're here to talk about that issue and some others is Gabriel Idahosa. He's an economist and the CEO of Maji, CEO UHY Maji and Company. Thank you so much, Gabriel. I hope I called that correctly. The CEO UHY Maji and Company. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Now, this tax issue is not a new issue. We continue to talk about it. The ongoing reforms, we had the review of the personal income tax earlier on, not too long ago. And of course, the issue of revenue generation for the federal government still right at the center of a transformation agenda of this government to raise as much revenue as it can to embark on, very ambitious infrastructure projects that the government has. But tax collection still remains a big issue. We have many hundreds of companies still evading taxes, either VAT or whatever class of tax, even government agencies themselves. We had just last week about 7 CEOs of some top companies were actually arrested for huge amounts of money in unpaid taxes. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's just that we haven't done enough as far as tax management is concerned. We needed to put a lot more people on the ground. We need to invest in more technology. That has been done particularly at the federal level. The technology is there now to capture the entire tax system, but the number of people you have and the training and the skills they require still needs to be upgraded. The number of tax offices you have are still too few for the country of this size. The number of people in each tax office are also too few. The quality of training that they get for them to do the job effectively also is a question that is not properly answered. So you have those issues to deal with. If you deal with them, the level of taxes you will collect will be far, far higher than what you are seeing now.
Now, that against the backdrop of, because according to the acting chairman of the agency, Mr. Kabiru Mashi, he was given figures from 2011, a target of 3.6 trillion. They actually recovered 4.6. They actually they beat their target. So I'm thinking, should it be increased? Because right now they've even put a new target of 5 trillion. They've upped the scale to 5 trillion. So looking at the numbers, it would look like, yes, they're setting targets and they're meeting and actually surpassing these targets. But in your opinion, do you think it's not enough? We can expand that bracket.
No, the point is, if you fix a low target, it's easy to meet. So
okay, in your opinion, so 5 trillion is a low target.
5 trillion, if you look at the size of the country, you look at the size of the economy, that's very small. So the question really is, how much are we ready to invest in our tax management capacity? You need to create many more offices. The last administration at FIRS has increased the number of offices, but they are still very far behind what you need to cover a country like Nigeria. So you got to invest in many more offices, and you need to train many more people. You need to hire many more people, lawyers, accountants. Yes, lawyers and accountants. You need to hire them and train them. Then you can be looking at a tax income of maybe 2 or 3 times what you are collecting now. So that's really the work that the Federal Inland Revenue has to do. They have done well in the last 3 years. They have shown the potential that if you have a good tax system, you can really collect far more than what we are collecting. And because we had oil, a lot of effort was not done before. In countries that do not have oil, this effort would have been done 20, 30 years ago.
Of course, there would have been more focus because we would have desperately needed
the money.
the money.
Exactly.
Okay. Apart from, of course, we have organizations, private organizations, avoiding taxes, but government agencies themselves. Why do you think a government agency itself would want to avoid paying taxes?
No, it's just the same reason why private people don't want to pay tax, because the government agencies rather than pay the tax, use the money for something else. And you have a tax management system that does not go after them, and so they don't just pay tax.
Should there be separate rules for them, or a separate, I don't know what to call it, a separate collection technique, or, module or something for government, being attached? Of course, the government agencies, and who's collecting the taxes is the government.
No, the fact is, in a serious tax environment, government agencies will be the first to pay tax, because the tax service can easily attach their property, they can easily attach their funds. If the Inland Revenue goes to the Minister of Finance and says that these agencies are owing us and you have to deduct it before you give them what is due to them, they will start paying their taxes. And the law allows them to attach the assets of any taxpayer to collect their taxes. So it's down to the professionalism, the capacity of the Federal Inland Revenue to collect tax from whoever, whether it is a government agency or a private agency. If they attack tax collection the same way, with the same capacity, with the same techniques as they use for private people, they will collect it.
Now, in terms of, going back to those, as an example, those companies, those CEOs that were arrested some time ago over unpaid taxes, and usually when this happens, when the FIRS goes after companies who have been avoiding taxes, the monies usually recovered are usually very high. So I'm thinking, should there be a monitoring team that would perhaps periodically check the books or try to look at it, who's paying and who's not paying, so that then it doesn't build up? Because it might become very difficult if you're asking company A, who's owing 620 million, the company might not have that money readily to pay. And then there's the issue of, dragging the issue, going to court or seizing assets, liquidating assets, and, jobs being affected. Something, should there be a monitoring team right from the start that monitors and ensure that if a company is owing or avoids tax payment once, twice, three, it doesn't continue to the point where at the end of the day, when you calculate the amounts, it's just eye-watching.
Well, it just illustrates the incompetence of the existing system. In the advanced countries, the 2020 countries we talk about, if the IRS demands tax first time, you don't pay, they probably send you a second demand. By the third demand, you don't pay, they are immediately in your office. And we are talking of a distance of about 2 to 3 months, at the most 6 months. So when the Inland Revenue itself allows tax to be owed for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and then you carry the media behind you to say we are arresting.
Yes, and then they stage this big dramatic
big drama. In
recovery.
in the other parts of the world that we want to be like, these kind of arrests are happening every day. Every day. Every day. If the Inland Revenue sends you the third demand and you don't pay, you know that they will be after you the next minute. And so you don't even wait for the second demand. By the time you get your first demand note from the Inland Revenue, you find a way to pay it.
Do you think perhaps that the punitive measures, should be reviewed? Because if you get a summons or a note the first time, a warning asking you that you have missed your first or second payment, and then company says, we'll wait, what can they do? And then following 6 months later, 12 months later, they don't come back, and then they relax, and then 3 years later, they come knocking on their door, with policemen and EFCC and all kinds of law enforcement agencies along with the cameras behind them to recover the funds. So do you think perhaps the punitive measures or punishment should be reviewed in terms of maybe jail terms or fines being paid?
The punitive measures are already in the books. They are all there in the books.
So if they are armed with
the measures are there even before the latest tax reforms. The point is, does the Inland Revenue apply those measures? The measures are there to arrest, to seize assets once you don't pay. But over the years, they were simply not implemented. So now there's a pressure on the Inland Revenue to collect taxes because oil revenue is going down. We have big ambitions. We want to do so many more things. And so the Inland Revenue is now doing things that they are supposed to do on a daily basis. There's a whole enforcement department in the Inland Revenue, both at the federal and state levels, that are supposed to just face enforcement. That every day they are supposed to arrest and attach property of anybody that has not paid tax. It's supposed to be a daily thing, just like everybody else goes to work.
Perhaps the most active department.
In fact, the public only knows that aspect of the IRS in advanced countries. They know that IRS is after people they quickly pay their own taxes because they don't wait to be the next victim. So it's not really lack of the laws or lack of the powers to do it. It's just lack of the capacity to do it before now. And even now, it is not done as a matter of daily process. It is done once in a while, maybe once in 2 or 3 months. They gather the press and everybody and they arrest a few people, and then nothing happens again for 6 or 7 months, and then they now say, okay, it's time to go and arrest a few people. This is something that goes on every day. It becomes part of the culture. So you know, even as a student in a lot of countries, you file your tax returns, you pay your taxes from your part-time income as a student because you don't want the IFRS coming to you in school. It is accepted, it is known. So it is nothing special to go and arrest people who have not paid taxes. It is just that we have not had a system that was working the way it is designed to work. The tax system was designed to work that way from the very beginning. But it wasn't just made to work that way by the people running it. And so we've got to really move away from this business of they have arrested 2 or 3 people, and that's the big issue. The big issue is that this is what they should be doing every day.
Do you think that perhaps the federal government should review perhaps the target of that particular department? You know, the way you have a marketing department in a regular big company, and they've been given targets, and if they don't meet, they ought to meet those particular targets. And of course, all eyes, all hands on deck to ensure that those targets are met. Do you think that perhaps it should be done in the way the private sector does it? That pressure is on them to meet those targets.
No, it's that pressure that is giving the results now. Okay. Clearly, the Federal Minister of Finance, the presidency has said you must move up your tax collection. Mm-hmm. But of course, you can't move from 4 trillion to 15 or 20 trillion in 1 year. So you want to move slowly and steadily. But the point really is that the capacity to collect tax is far higher than what we are doing now. The tax nets, the number of people, companies that can come into the tax paying group are far, far higher than those that are being captured now. So the Inland Revenue itself has to significantly expand its capacity, the sheer size. The FIRS should have far more offices than they have now. They should have far more people than they have now to collect, because if you are going to collect several trillions, it makes sense to spend $500 million to hire more people, train them, and make sure they are there. You find large areas of this country, perhaps several local governments of this country, where you don't have an FIRS office. Perhaps you have one office in a state. So how do you collect taxes from, say, an office in Burutu, for example, where the only FIRS in Delta is in Asaba? The company in Burutu may well just operate forever and not know whether there's anything called FIRS. Until one day, there's so much pressure, they show up in Burutu and start picking up people
and making arrests. Okay.
Making a big deal
Hold your thoughts first. We need to take a break. At this point, we'll come back to talk more. This I will talk about tax consultants and the whole tax collection business. I have been talking to Gabriel Idahosa. He's an economist, and we have been looking at taxation in Nigeria, particularly at those companies and government agencies that avoid paying taxes. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. We're still talking taxes or tax evasion, if you will. Gabriel Idahosa is still here. Gabriel, okay, before we went on the break, we talked about, of course, how they can expand the FIRS, expand the bracket of collection and all of that. But let's talk about the technology, the infrastructure in place. There obviously has to be like a central database where they can capture companies or capture individuals and government agencies also to ensure that they, maximize in terms of returns. Or you were saying that we do have the infrastructure in place, but we don't have the, what was it you called it?
The data that goes into the infrastructure. If you build a massive computer, it is just an infrastructure. You have to now feed the right information into it. Various government agencies have that infrastructure already. Okay. The identity management people have their own, the licensing offices have their own, the CBN have their own, the Corporate Affairs Commission have their own, the customs have their own. So the first thing the government wants to do is identify a single source of a national database. In a country like America, you only need your social security number to get everything else about the person. So the country has to decide, what is that number? Is it your national ID number or your driving license? Once a specific data is accepted as the national ID, then the database will keep the information on every person in Nigeria, at least every adult, in that single database. So whether it is the tax office or the customs or the Corporate Affairs Commission or the driving license people, whoever, or even INEC, whoever needs data about anybody, it just uses a single database.
How close are we to that? Which are we going to use or decide on at the end of the day? We have the National Identity Management Commission. We don't know if that's going to be the central one that we'll use. We have other agencies, like you said, who have theirs. They've had those for years, but we don't know how effective those have been. So are we slow in deciding on which to use?
Yes, government has to take a decision very quickly. In some countries, it's something as simple as a national birth registry, where once every person is born, it goes into that place, you get a number, and as you grow up, everything goes in there. Through your education, you get a driving license, you buy a house, everything starts from your national registry, or that is our population commission. Government will probably use the new Nigerian Identity Management Commission system. But once you do that, it means every other agency will stop collecting data and duplicating the effort. So if you need any information, you go to the National Identity Management Commission, and every person will have an ID. So if you are buying a house, if you are setting up a business, if you are applying for any government permission, it is that number you use, and that computer, the system generates the transmission of data to all other agencies. If you want a driving license, you just show your national ID number, and the licensing office gets an upload of your information. So they don't need to take your photograph again, go through data capture because you need a driving license. So that is what is for government to decide.
Now these days, when one is asked, how many are we in Nigeria, you hear over 150 million, 160 million, 167 million, depending on who's answering or who's asking the question. So in terms of capturing data, those of us in the country or those of us who are eligible to pay taxes, do you think we need to, apart from the National Identity Management Commission, what do you want to do? Would there be a need for like another general census, as it's called?
No, you have your...
I know South Africa did that recently.
Yeah, you have to do your census every 10 years.
Okay.
Yes, that's the international standard. Every
are we
10
due
years.
For one?
Yes, well, we did the last one a couple of years back. Okay. So we'll do another one. But that one is essentially to update the database, to add more information, to say, for example, how many people have become 18 years old, what is the demographics of the population, how many are women, how many are men, how many are unemployed, how many are
under a certain age
for statistical analysis. But the actual database is updated regularly as people come into the system. For example, now that we don't have a database that starts from birth, when you are born, from the time, for example, people go into primary school, they can start to capture them from there. From the hospitals when infants are taken for vaccination, they can take them from there. But there has to be a system that captures individuals at the earliest time into the database. And once it's in the database, he or she's in the database, then It progresses from there. He goes to school, he comes out, he gets a job, he wants to set up a business. Everything goes into that database. In fact, he gets his passport. The details of the passport is there. So as he goes in and out of the country, through the airport system, his movements are there in the database. So that's how, even issues of security, that's how the advanced countries we are trying to catch up with run their system.
Okay, let's move away from that. Let's talk about tax consultants. We do know that some states, local governments, employ the use of tax consultants. Now, some of the senior staff of the FIRS have kicked against this. According to them, the FIRS Act of 2007 does not recognize the use of tax consultants. They've even gone as far as saying that it's illegal, and that it might be one of the reasons why, in terms of revenue yield, the FIRS has not been able to do better than it's doing right now. What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, those consultants are not really consultants in the true sense of the word, because a consultant is someone that comes to help a client to set up a system or advise them in what they are doing and gives them support for a short time to empower them to become independent of the consultant and be able to run their system well. For a consultant might come set up a computer system, help you to run the revenue collection for a month or two, confirm that you are doing it well, and say, okay, we are leaving, we can come and see how you are doing in 6 months and give you some support. But when the so-called consultant is permanently in the place, crawling around all the offices and going to taxpayers' offices, he's no more a consultant. At best, he's an outsourcing contractor just coming in to do, because a consultant will not do routine things. The routine business of making tax assessment and collecting tax is not the job for a consultant, because that is what an IRS is set up to do. So if you want to get consultants to do assessments and collect tax, then you scrap the IRS, because that means they don't have anything else to do. And so the FIRS is correct to say it is illegal. That was not the intention when the first type of consultants were hired. The consultants were hired to advise the Inland Revenue at the states how to set up proper collection systems, train the people who are there, and then leave.
What about helping them to modernize their tax systems? Because the argument also is that some state and local governments have relied on these consultants instead of updating or modernizing their tax collection systems.
That's precisely the point. The job of the consultants was to help to train them, help them to set up better tax collection systems, bring in technology, bring in innovations, train them, train the other people that will run the support systems for a period, and then leave. But you don't have those kind of consultants.
So now, what is it that those consultants went there to do? What went wrong? Is it that they taught them, or the local government officials or state governments just felt, they just weren't bothered to?
No, I think the key issue really, which FIRS is talking about, is the fact that at some point, very early in the process, it became clear that the intention was not to have the consultants that will do traditional consulting work and leave. It became clear that for some other interests, it was now convenient for some people in Inland Revenue and the consultants to agree to just continue to operate forever as consultants, but in the true sense of the word, they are not consultants. They are outsourcing tax contractors who go around to taxpayers and say, we are here on behalf of the state Inland Revenue to collect tax, and all kinds of unethical things sometimes do happen. And this is really the issue that the FIRS is very worried about. The FIRS has consistently increased its tax collection capacity, as has been shown by records, without using those so-called consultants. So the worry of FIRS is that at the state and local government levels, what was intended to be a short consulting assignment has now become a permanent arrangement, being sustained by other interests that are beyond the collection of Inland Revenue for the states and local governments.
Hopefully the relevant authorities will look into that. Now, with this new target of the FIRS, 5 trillion before the end of this year, according to the acting chairman, Mr. Kabiru Mashi, 5 trillion naira, in terms of how much the government can capture in terms of raising revenue for the federal government, we know that the DMO raises money, billions of naira every month on behalf of the federal government. How much can in terms of impact on the federal government finances, how much can the federal government rely on tax collection if the FIRS is able to meet its target of 5 trillion and even perhaps go beyond that?
Well, it is going to be a slow process of increasing the share of federal revenues that come from taxes compared to what you get, for example, from oil, from royalties. Well, the royalties are actually part of the taxes, and then what you get from customs duty. Right now, of course, the oil royalties are the highest, far highest. But every year, the portion coming from taxes have been rising steadily. When you consider that this year, the federal budget itself is 4-point-something trillion, and inland revenue is targeting to collect 5 trillion themselves alone.
I mean, that's a lot of money. That's more than our budget. So one would wonder, okay, we do know that money will be shared between
exactly.
federal, state, and local government, but that's still more money in their hands.
Exactly. So progressively, obviously, this government knows that if not in our generation, the time will come where oil will become either no longer available or the price will have fallen so low that it will no more be a significant source of income. So the government is moving steadily under the sheer knowledge of the fact that that will happen to increase revenues very quickly from these other sources.
What about the attitude of Nigerians? Do you think Nigerians have embraced, because I know because we've not had a very effective taxation system over the years, it's almost alien to some Nigerians, to even pay taxes. Many are aggrieved, you want them to pay taxes. They say, we don't have basic amenities from the federal government. Why should I pay for roads? Why should I pay for the water? When I turn on my tap, there's no water. I go home, there's no light, and you want me to pay taxes. So that attitude, that attitude by Nigerians, is that going to change anytime soon, moving, in tandem with federal government's resolute resolve to ensure that taxes are fully collected?
No, it's not going to change willingly. It's going to be changed by force. Some element of force will be there. Okay. Very strong enforcement of tax, but it's going to be helped by improvements in governance. If you have states and local government that are beginning to put a lot of that money into services, and people see infrastructure, services being provided, and they can see what the taxpayers' money is doing in some states, and they are becoming more and more willing to pay tax. So that is happening in some states because they can see. But at the federal level, it's difficult to see what the federal government is doing with money. So the resistance to federal taxes are probably much more than in those states where you can see some results.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Gabriel, thank you so much for your very insightful contribution on the issue of taxation in Nigeria. Thank you so much for being here. I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you.
I have been talking to Gabriel Idahosa. He's an economist, and we have been looking at taxes in Nigeria, particularly tax evasion. Of course, the Federal Inland Revenue Service has been stepping up efforts to ensure that it increases, or rather it captures as many organizations as it can, and of course recover taxes, especially those who have been avoiding taxes. That's what we've been looking at today. We'll take another quick break now, and we'll be right back. morning. Let's quickly check with the financial market indicators for Monday, starting with the cost of lending at the interbank. Well, the market is still very much illiquid at the moment, and we saw rates closing yesterday mixed at an average of 14%. Now, for the secured open buyback instrument for the banks and discount houses, rates were flat yesterday at a 14% average. And at the currencies arm of the market, the Central Bank of Nigeria held its first bi-weekly forex auction for the week. The Apex Bank sold $150 million at the rate of 155 naira 75 kobo to the dollar. But we saw the dollar weakening, especially at the interbank foreign exchange market. According to traders, some fuel importers were issued fresh import licenses, and that boosted dollar demand and put pressure on the local currency. And of course, we haven't been getting a sufficient dollar supply from some local units of some multinational oil firms, and that of course added more pressure to the dollar. It closed at 157 naira 95 kobo at the interbank foreign exchange market yesterday. But don't forget that today the House of Representatives ad hoc committee investigating the near collapse of the Nigerian capital market will reconvene again in the nation's capital, Abuja. We're expecting more presentations, more stakeholders and market players to come to give their thoughts on what they think led to the near collapse of the market, and of course, most importantly, why the market has not recovered as much as it ought to have. It talking about the lingering investors' apathy. Well, that's all we can take in today's edition of Business Morning. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Channels News Track is at the top of the hour. I'm Esther Ogbodaga. Bye for now.